Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Rena Ninan will join me in just a moment. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the House will vote on a war powers resolution that would curb the president's ability to use military force in Iran. It comes after the House received a briefing by Trump administration officials, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Defense Secretary Mark Esper. Here is how members of both parties reacted.
Without commenting on content, my reaction to this briefing was it was sophomoric and utterly unconvincing. And I believe more than ever, the Congress needs to act to protect the constitutional provisions about war and peace.
How much is enough? How many more Americans did Soleimani need to kill before somebody's going to support him finally being taken out and removed from this planet? And so, again, I would go back to my basic question is the world a safer place with Soleimani not in it? And the clear answer is yes.
The briefings come after Iran issued retaliation for the U.S. airstrike that killed one of its top commanders, General Qasem Soleimani. The briefings come a day after Iran launched missile strikes on two bases in Iraq where U.S. troops are stationed, the Al-Assad Air Base and the Erbil Air Base. Both are more than 100 miles from the Iraqi capital of Baghdad. Video from state TV shows the Iranian military launching the missiles. There were no American or Iraqi casualties from the attack. A defense official tells CBS News the U.S. had, quote, multiple hours of warning prior to the attack, giving troops plenty of time to take shelter in bunkers. On Twitter, Iran's foreign minister called the strike proportionate measures. He also said, quote, we do not seek escalation or war, but will defend ourselves against any aggression. In remarks earlier today, President Trump slammed the Iran nuclear deal and announced new sanctions on Tehran. He also praised the U.S. military for taking proper precautions to prevent casualties.
Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world. No American or Iraqi lives were lost because of the precautions taken, the dispersal of forces, and an early warning system that worked very well.
Catherine Herridge is a CBS News senior investigative correspondent and joins me now. Hi, Catherine. So we heard their mixed reaction after the briefing on Capitol Hill. What can you tell us about what the intelligence community is saying about the evidence justifying the strike that killed Soleimani?
Well, the key question for both sides, Republicans and Democrats, is whether the intelligence was credible and whether it really amounted to an imminent threat to U.S. personnel in the region. What we heard from the president this morning is that General Soleimani was the architect of the attack on the U.S. embassy and that he was further escalating his actions by being in Baghdad, the president said, to further attacks on U.S. personnel. And that's parallel to what we heard from the defense secretary yesterday, Mark Esper. He said General Soleimani was in Baghdad to, quote, coordinate these attacks. But as we've listened to senators come out of the briefing this afternoon, they've been a very mixed picture about the intelligence that we heard. We just heard from Senator Menendez, who said, quote, that he was unsatisfied by the information that he had received and that he had real concerns and more questions than answers. And he indicated that at one point it seemed that their line of questioning was cut off by the briefers. So again, there is this split, and it seems to be a pretty political split between those who believe the intelligence warranted immediate and defensive action by the United States, and then on the other side, that it didn't reach that threshold because General Soleimani was well known to travel in the region, whether it was Syria, Lebanon, or in this case, Iraq.
And Catherine, you spoke with Senator Lindsey Graham this morning ahead of the president's remarks. What is the senator's outlook about the administration's plans with Iran moving forward from this?
Well, Senator Lindsey Graham really matters in this conversation because he often has the ear of the president, and what he's been saying consistently to CBS News is that he's urged the administration to lay out a roadmap or a path, if you will, to de-escalation. And what he told us this morning is that he felt it was important for the White House to lay out a strategic vision, a strategic objective. And he said that would include nuclear energy for that country, but not a nuclear weapon. And he said it was not going to be sufficient for Iran to de-escalate. And he said it must be made very clear to the Iranians that if they choose to escalate at this point, and that this matter is really in their hands, that they have to consider that their oil refineries are in the crosshairs. And that matters because that is the economic lifeline for the regime.
And Catherine, has there been any more information about threats that could be posed domestically or covertly?
Well, there's been a joint intelligence bulletin from the FBI and Homeland Security. This is somewhat standard in these situations, but what caught my attention is that they talk about the possibility of really a 1-2 punch, a physical attack like what we saw in Iraq last evening, followed by a cyber attack. And cyber is really used as a force multiplier in these situations. So you have the physical attack, and then you can create confusion with a cyber attack, perhaps on financial institutions through a denial of service attack that floods the system and does not allow legitimate transactions to be processed. And of course, as you know through your own reporting, cyber is so important because attribution can be so difficult. The Iranian DNA in cyberspace is very similar to the Russians because they've historically leaned on the Russians for training and technology.
All right, let's also bring in now our Natalie Brand, who is at the White House. Thanks for joining us, Natalie. We understand that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will hold a vote tomorrow on the War Powers Resolution. Remind us what the goal is there and whether there's bipartisan support for it.
Tanya, this is something that the House Speaker signaled that she would do, and this is a resolution to try and limit the president's ability to take military action in Iran or against Iran. A similar resolution has been introduced by a number of Democratic lawmakers on the Senate side. Ultimately, this is something that could be vetoed by the president, but a largely symbolic vote that we can expect to see. At this point, a number of Republican lawmakers continue to support the administration's decision to both strike Soleimani and the handling of the events, the fallout that has followed. So interesting, despite both sides, Iran's foreign minister and the president today signaling a desire to de-escalate the situation. Interesting that the House Speaker still feels that this is the right time to bring forward this war power resolution to try to take back some of congressional authority over military action. Tanya.
And Natalie, during the president's speech today, he outlined some things he'd like to see moving forward with Iran. Can you run us through some of the desires on his wish list?
Well, what's notable is he again took aim at the 2015 nuclear deal, which, of course, the United States pulled out of. But he called on allies to try and work together to renegotiate a new nuclear deal. Obviously, reaction is still coming in, and we'll have to hear from Iran's foreign minister to see whether or not there's any signals coming from Iran about willingness to sit down at the table, whether the president's speech today is enough to try to launch a new diplomatic effort. We'll have to see where this goes from here. Obviously, lots of questions remain, but again, overall, a message, an intent to de-escalate current tensions, potentially bring Iran and other allies back to the negotiating table. And also, he mentioned that he wants to get NATO allies more involved in efforts to try to simmer these tensions in the Middle East. Tanya?
All right. Natalie Brand and Catherine Herridge, both in Washington, we thank you.
You're welcome.